Buonasera, benvenuti, good afternoon, and welcome to the Italian Academy. I am Barbara Faedda, the Academy's Executive Director, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all today. A few years ago, thanks to a grant from the autonomous region of Sardinia and with a fruitful collaboration with the Mont'e Prama Foundation, we established the Sardinia Cultural Heritage Program. Through the years, we have presented conferences, exhibitions, and publications. The first book of essays was published by Columbia University Press in 2023. That was on the giant statues of Mont'e Prama. I am glad to announce that the second volume of essays, this one is about the archaeological treasures of the city of Taros in the same part of Sardinia, will be released also by Columbia University Press in fall 2025. We thank the team at Columbia University Press for their attention to important Italian cultural topics and for producing two beautiful books on the heritage of Sardinia. Today we are celebrating 50 years since the discovery of the first giant, a groundbreaking moment in ancient history and archaeology of the Mediterranean and Italy. At this point, I would hand my microphone to the Consul General of Italy in New York, Fabrizio De Michele, but with great regret, he told us about a pressing commitment. He cannot be with us today, but he sends his warmest greetings. But Paolo Carta will now give you further details about the Sardinia project.
Sardinia Cultural Heritage Project debuted in 2022 with an acclaimed digital exhibition showcasing the colossal Mont'e Prama statues. Building on this success, we've expanded our digital offerings to include immersive experiences of the ancient site of Taros and the UNESCO-recognized complex known as Su Nuragic di Barumini, providing unprecedented access to Sardinia's remarkable Nuragic civilization. This virtual exhibition will remain accessible online, inviting global audiences to explore these archaeological treasures from anywhere in the world. We also take great pride in our thriving partnerships with distinguished professors and specialists from Italian universities and institutions like the University of Cagliari and the University of Sassari, alongside renowned scholars from the US, specializing in Sardinian and Mediterranean archaeology. This collaborative relationship have been instrumental in bringing authentic expertise and rigorous scholarship to our Sardinian cultural heritage initiatives. I would like to once again express my sincere thanks to the Mont'e Prama Foundation and its president, Anthony Muroni, for their outstanding event in Cabras. I deeply appreciated the International Archaeology Festival, which Barbara and I attended last summer. Thanks to the archaeologist Giorgio Murru, who joined us on stage, we had the opportunity to present the work of the Sardinia project. We were immersed in a vibrant, globally engaged environment that highlighted Sardinia's cultural heritage on the world stage. At the time, the loan of a statue to the National Archaeological Museum in Madrid was nearing completion. Just one milestone in a journey from New York to Tokyo. Thank you again and congratulations to the foundation. Barbara.
Giuseppe Meloni, who is a council member of the government of the Sardinia region, could not be here with us today, so I will ask Gianluca Cadeddu, Director General of the Regional Planning Center and our main interlocutor from the very start of the Sardinia project, to convey Mr. Meloni's words.
Signore e signori, illustri ospiti, desidero innanzitutto esprimere il mio profondo rammarico per non poter essere presente a questa importante celebrazione. Purtroppo gli impegni istituzionali legati alla responsabilità a cui sono chiamato, specie in questo momento in cui si elabora e si discute la nuova manovra finanziaria della mia regione, mi impediscono di partecipare. Sono profondamente dispiaciuto di non poter condividere personalmente con voi tutti, come avrei desiderato, la solennità e il significato di questo straordinario evento, qual è la celebrazione del 50° anniversario della scoperta delle statue di Mont'e Prama qui a New York. Si tratta di un traguardo di incredibile importanza per la Sardegna e per il nostro patrimonio culturale, un momento questo che avrei voluto onorare di persona. Desidero rivolgere i miei più sentiti ringraziamenti all'Italian Academy della Columbia University per aver organizzato e ospitato questo prestigioso momento in una sede così illustre. Il legame tra l'Italian Academy e la Regione Sardegna è ormai consolidato e il Sardinian Cultural Heritage Project ne è una testimonianza preziosa. Voglio quindi esprimere i miei più sentiti ringraziamenti a tutta l'organizzazione, ma consentitemi un ringraziamento particolare alla direttrice Barbara Faedda per il suo instancabile impegno e per la vicinanza dimostrata alla nostra terra. Desidero inoltre esprimere la mia gratitudine al professor Paolo Carta per l'eccellente lavoro nell'organizzazione di questo importante anniversario e a tutti i relatori presenti che con la loro autorevolezza e il loro prestigio internazionale contribuiscono a rendere questa celebrazione straordinaria. Questa collaborazione rappresenta una testimonianza concreta della capacità dell'arte e della cultura di unire le comunità di tutto il mondo. Desidero inoltre esprimere la mia riconoscenza a tutte le istituzioni, ai ricercatori e a coloro che hanno dedicato tempo ed energie alla conservazione e alla promozione dei nostri tesori culturali e archeologici. Le statue di Mont'e Prama non sono semplici reperti del passato. Esse costituiscono simboli della nostra identità, raccontano la storia di una civiltà che fiorì in Sardegna migliaia di anni fa e che ci collegano alle nostre radici profonde. Rappresentano un patrimonio culturale di inestimabile valore che testimonia la ricchezza e la complessità della nostra storia. Della loro valorizzazione ringrazio la Fondazione Mont'e Prama e il suo presidente Antonio Muroni. Riunirci qui a New York per celebrare questo anniversario ci ricorda l'importanza di condividere il nostro patrimonio con il mondo. La cultura è uno strumento potente di dialogo e comprensione, capace di creare connessioni profonde e di arricchire le nostre vite, superando barriere geografiche, barriere linguistiche, barriere culturali. Promuovere il nostro patrimonio storico e archeologico è essenziale non solo per preservare la nostra identità, ma anche per contribuire al panorama culturale globale. Iniziative come queste invitano il mondo a scoprire e ad apprezzare la bellezza e la profondità della storia della Sardegna, incoraggiando al contempo a visitare la nostra splendida isola. È nostro desiderio ispirare le future generazioni a custodire e proteggere i nostri beni culturali, assicurando che rimangano una fonte di orgoglio e di ispirazione per il futuro. Infine, vi esorto a lasciarvi coinvolgere dalla nostra millenaria cultura, a scoprire le storie che le statue di Mont'e Prama custodiscono e a far vostri i valori che esse rappresentano: forza, resilienza e unità. Insieme celebriamo questo straordinario patrimonio e continuiamo a promuovere con fierezza la ricchezza della Sardegna nel panorama culturale internazionale. Thank you so much.
I am now glad to leave the floor to Anthony Muroni, President of the Mont'e Prama Foundation.
To Executive Director Barbara Faedda, Professor Paolo Carta, distinguished authorities, honored guests. It is about a great honor and a profound emotion for me to be here today in this prestigious venue of the Italian Academy and at Columbia University, on the occasion of the conference celebrating the 50th anniversary of the discovery of the Mont'e Prama statue complex. First and foremost, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Director Barbara Faedda and Professor Paolo Carta whose impeccable work has made this important occasion possible. A warm thanks also goes to the Columbia University, which from the very beginning, thanks to the foresight and the commitment of the Sardinia Regional Planning Center, has been an essential partner for the initiatives we have had to privilege the develop and promote ER in the United States over the years. I also wish to express my thanks to the Consulate General of Italy for its valuable support, and to the Metropolitan Museum of the New York, with which, through the introduction provided by the Italian Academy, we have embarked on a collaboration of extraordinary significance. The loan of the Mont'e Prama giants for the 6-month exhibition in the Met marked a milestone for our foundation, and with the recently signed 3-year partnership agreement, we are laying the groundwork for ambitious new joint projects. A special thanks once again goes to the Italian Academy, not only for organizing this conference, but also for choosing, just 3 years after the first, to dedicate a second exhibition to the extraordinary story of the Mont'e Prama giants and the millennia of heritage they represent. This is a gesture that once again underscores the importance of bringing international recognition to this remarkable chapter of Nuragic civilization. A well-deserved tribute, finally, goes to the speakers present today, whose expertise and authoritative contribution will add further richness and depth to this celebration. Individuals like you, with your dedication and passion, embody the cultural legacy that we are proud to safeguard and promote. I would like to conclude by emphasizing how the Mont'e Prama giants and the Nuragic civilization, they symbolize our heritage not only of Sardinia, but of all humanity. Giving international visibility to the giants means not only honoring and historical and archaeological significance of our island, crucial role of the civilization that followed one another here. We are overcoming decades of silence and hesitancy, reaffirming the value of our history and contributing to a broader, richer, and shared narrative that illuminates the deep roots of who we are today. Thank you all for being here and for contributing to the appreciation of this extraordinary story. Thank you.
Today we are very grateful and proud to have here this distinguished group of international scholars. Most of them traveled from far away to be with us. We look forward to our speakers enlightening us about this archaeological discovery, one of the most exciting of the past half century, with guidance from the moderator Stephen Ellis. Our plan is to hear the talks and then to have a short Q&A, and then inaugurate the exhibition on the ground floor with some wine and food, finally. But now let me introduce the moderator of this conference. Stephen Ellis is a Roman archaeologist with interests in ancient cities and urban life. He has directed the University of Cincinnati's excavations at Pompeii and Tarros in Sardinia. His primary publications include The Roman Retail Revolution, 2018, The Making of Pompeii, 2011, and The Porta Stabia Neighborhood at Pompeii, 2023. Stephen is the recipient of several major grants and fellowships from NEH, ACLC, Loeb, National Geographic, and the Rome Prize from the American Academy in Rome, and is professor of classics and Roman archaeology at the University of Cincinnati. I wish you a pleasant afternoon, and I now leave the stage to Professor Ellis. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, for the very kind invitation and introduction, but also the invitation to be here. It's always great to come back to the Italian Academy for these events, and these ones on Sardinia are always very special. I had the great honor to get to introduce our speakers and then to kind of moderate the questions at the end of their talks. First, I would like to welcome back to the Italian Academy Anna Depalmas, who is the product of the universities of Cagliari and Roma La Sapienza, where she earned her PhD in prehistoric archaeology. She is today full professor of archaeology at the University of Sassari. A tour through her bibliography at the university, reveals some startling things. Lots of publications. You'll see in the pamphlet, there's some introductions written in there that she has some 240 publications. And that's important, of course, but also lots of co-authorships, which I think at once reveals just how respected she is as a scholar of Sardinian prehistory. Her work within and indeed across the sciences is what characterizes her contributions to our knowledge of Sardinian history. With no fewer than 4 books at last count, she has undertaken neutron imaging studies of bronze statuettes, critical studies of human land use patterns over time, as well as sophisticated studies on Sardinian ecological patterns, but also an archaeometric study of a Nuragic period model boat made of bronze, and even morphological studies of ancient grape pips. I think we get an idea here of just the range and scale of her work. Anna's expertise takes her work beyond Sardinia too, with important contributions to sites on the Italian peninsula, but also to Tunisia and the Balearic Islands, where she's also led excavations. But it also brings her to Mont'e Prama, and so it gives me great pleasure to welcome Anna Depalmas to give her presentation entitled From Small Bronzes to Stone Statues, Continuity and Change in Sardinia's Early Iron Age. Welcome.
I wish to say thanks to Barbara Faedda and Paolo Carta to their kind invitation, and also to Italian Academy, Autonomous Region of Sardinia, and the Mont'e Prama Foundation for promote this event. So, the so-called, the so-called Nuragic civilization spanned a long period from approximately the 18th century BCE to the 6th century BCE. As is well known, this civilization was distinguished by its remarkable architectural structures. Archaeological evidence indicates that beginning in the Middle Bronze Age, around the 18th century BCE, truncated conical towers of varying complexity, known as nuraghi, began to be constructed, along with collective tombs, the so-called Jan's tombs. From the Middle Bronze Age onward, it appears that Sardinia was characterized by a unified social and political organization, resulting in a remarkable degree of homogeneity in both monumental architecture and the production of cultural artifacts. Significant cultural transformation took place during the final phase of the Bronze Age, 12th, 11th century BCE, including the cessation of nuraghi construction and the simultaneous renewal, consolidation, and expansion of villages. This was also the period in which cult sites developed, centered around monuments built over natural springs or deliberately excavated wells. The final phase of the Nuragic period coincided with the final Bronze Age and the early Iron Age, 12th, 8th century BCE. Evidence suggests that from the final Bronze Age onward, there was a significant increase in the production of bronze artifacts, indicating major advancement in metallurgy. Although some archaeological literature extends the production of bronze figurines to the final Bronze Age, all definitive evidence of this particular craft dates to the early Iron Age. However, this production can be seen as a continuation of an earlier artisanal tradition reflecting ideas and stylistic trends that had already taken root in the Final Bronze Age, thus serving as a true expression of Nuragic culture. Interest in this particular category of artifacts dates back as far as the 18th century of our era, as evidenced by a small group of bronzes that reached the Museum of the Sant'Ignazio College, later known as the Kircherian Museum, as a gift from Cardinal Alessandro Albani around 1763. This is confirmed by the reference in Johann Joachim Winckelmann's first edition of Geschichte der Kunst, 1764, which represents the earliest known mention of Sardinian bronze statuettes. The number of discoveries and hypotheses regarding the nature of these sculptures grew exponentially throughout the 19th century, thanks to scholars such as Alberto La Marmora, Giovanni Spano, Vincenzo Crespi, Antonio Taramelli, and Giovanni Pinza, among others. However, it was Giovanni Liliu who, recognizing the complexity of the subject, undertook the first systematic study of Sardinian bronze figurines. The 25th Venice Biennale Art Exhibition in 1949, through an exhibition curated by Giovanni Liliu and Gennaro Pesce, brought Nuragic material culture to the attention of both scholars and the general public for the first time. The exhibition laid the foundation for Liliu's subsequent research, both in identifying orientalizing influences, possibly arriving via Cyprus and Syria, and publishing newly discovered specimens unearthed during the excavation of Barumini. Unfortunately, this surge of interest also attracted the attention of the antiquities market, leading to widespread illegal excavations that resulted in the loss of a significant amount of valuable material essential for research and study. As a consequence, while many of the statuettes were discovered at the dawn of archaeological research as a discipline, a significant portion comes from private collection fueled by the antiquities trade. This means that many have no precise provenance or were found in contexts that are difficult to date. The most reliable chronological data on Sardinia bronze statuettes comes from discoveries on the Italian peninsula, where they were imported and later found, predominantly within Villanovan tombs. This is exemplified by 9 sites that have yielded a total of 13 bronze ship models of Sardinian origin. A particularly solid chronological marker for these bronzes is provided by grave goods from a burial at Ponte Rotto of Cavalupo in Vulci, in northern Lazio. Among these artifacts were a basket, a stool, and most notably a figurine of a priest boxer. A recent reassessment of this burial context has allowed scholars to date it to between the late 10th and early 9th century BCE. This represents the only securely dated Sardinian bronze statuette depicting a human figure. Statuettes with known origins demonstrate a strong connection to votive and cult activities. Most were discovered in complexes dedicated to religious worship, such as sacred springs and wells, natural caves, and Megaron temples, suggesting they were produced specifically for ritual offerings or religious ceremonies. These figurines of high artistic and historical value depict women, men, animals, and objects from everyday life in miniature. Particular attention is given to human figures, which provide a detailed iconographic archive of the types, roles, clothing, and attitudes that Nuragic craftsmen thought to represent. The most common figurines depict warriors in a static pose, although rare instances exist of combat scenes, where a warrior is shown dominating his opponent, evoking movement and action. Although most figures, 42%, represent armed men, many others, including female figures, are non-military and seem to depict different occupation or social statuses. The majority of figures are in recognizable pose, saluting with the right hand, 64%, more rarely with their left hand or with both hands raised. The gesture, with the palm open toward an imaginary spectator, appears to express devotion, prayer, or gratitude for divine favor, following a votive offering or a supplication. Many figures are identified as offerers. Among the offerings depicted are recognizable items such as pieces of bread or flat loaves with a hollow center and radial cuts. Other statuettes depict animals such as rams carried on the backs of the figures or held by their feet. Beyond gestures, clothing plays a crucial role in differentiating the statuette's subjects. Women are well represented among the offering figures, and when 37.5%, and when including fragmentary examples, their proportion reaches 46%. Female figures are typically depicted wearing head coverings such as veils, hoods, or conical Pegasus hats. In some cases, they wear a small skull cap, a turban, or have straight, loose hair with a central parting. Their garments are long, sometimes featuring 2 or 3 decorative bands on the tunic or cloak with an additional stole. Among male figures, a distinctive feature is a long, knotted staff firmly held in the left hand, possibly symbolizing high social rank or authority. They wear a wide cloak and a dagger with a gamma-shaped hilt on their chest. Their right hand is either raised in a gesture or holds a short sword. Armed war figures are among the most common statuettes, 61%, and are identified based on specific elements that appear either individually or in combination. These elements include helmets, 1 or more swords, a shield suspended from a bandolier across their chest, and dagger, often featuring a gamma-shaped hilt. Their armor is adorned with a straight incision, and they wear various types of jackets over short tunics that leave their legs exposed, which are protected by laced, closed leggings or leather chaps. A limited number of figures display a breast strap or expose their bare chests. These armed figures are often depicted in a stance of worship, raising their right hand in a gesture of salutation. In other cases, both hands grasp weapons and shields. Nearly all of them wear helmets of various styles, some adorned with horns. Archers form a distinct group, characterized by the consistent presence of large bows, which they either hold vertically, embrace with both arms, or carry on their backs. Their protective gear includes quadrilateral armor plates on the chest at various heights. The prominence of weapons and hunting imagery strongly suggests the status and activities of the dominant aristocratic class. It is reasonable to question whether the qualitative and quantitative differences in clothing and weaponry, sword and dagger, bow and sword, sword and shield, reflected an individual's position within the social hierarchy. The bow, in particular, may have been closely associated with hunting, which held a symbolic and religious significance, and could have been part of a heroic rite of passage into manhood. The ostentatious display of weapons and hunting, both clear indicators of the ruling aristocracy pursuits, is undeniable. Figures of boxers evoke association with wrestling and ritual games, possibly carrying a similar symbolic meaning. Only 3 examples of boxer statuettes exist, identifiable by their large carved leather shields, a boxing glove with a protrusion on the right arm, bare chests, and asymmetrical kilts, shorter in the front and longer at the back. A similar garment is worn by 4 archers, a tribal chief, and 3 other figures. The bronze statuettes from Ponte Rotto of Cavalupo in Vulci lacks a boxing glove, but features an object hanging from its right wrist, possibly a container for oil, which was traditionally used by wrestlers. In this context, the Mont'e Prama site in Cabras stands out as a striking example of elite power and strength being exalted through artistic representation. At this site, numerous fragments of at least 30 limestone statues, each exceeding 2.5 meters in height, have been discovered. These statues depict unarmed individuals, archers, and boxers, following the same iconographic patterns as the bronze statuettes: short vests, breastplates, gorgets, gloves, and horned helmets for the archers, gloves and shields raised above the head for the boxers, and long plaited hair draped over the chest and the shoulders. Some of these representations are relatively flat, with only the face and nose rendered in relief. The eyes are depicted as double-incised circles, while the mouth is represented by a single straight incised line. It is evident that the sculptures of Mont'e Prama sought to recreate and amplify the figurative themes seen in bronze statuettes. However, due to the limitations of working with limestone, they could not fully capture the fluidity of the gestures and the shapes found in the smaller bronze figures, resulting in a more rigid and static portrait. Nonetheless, the message conveyed is even stronger and more explicit: the glorification of a warrior elite through symbolic imagery meant to communicate strength and power. These warrior figures are often found alongside the stone models of Nuragic, sometimes single towers, but more commonly complex structures. While 13 of these have been reconstructed, many others remain fragmented. The association between this representation and Nuragic seems deliberate, reinforcing a connection between the two. The images of boxers have been interpreted as a representation of athletes who participated in games associated with religious rituals or funerary practices, reflecting a belief that the combative nature of boxing was closely tied to the religious faith. This interpretation is supported by the discovery of seated burials in cylindrical pit tombs within the necropolis where the statues were found. Approximately 60 of these tombs have been identified so far, with the number expected to increase. The skeletal remains examined thus far predominantly belong to young individuals with well-developed musculature, suggesting an athletic activity. Recent excavations, including those conducted last year, have provided valuable dating evidence for the tombs. Few objects were found within the pits, but some rare pottery, such as gray ceramics typical of the Oristano area, indicates a time frame spanning to the late Bronze Age and to the early Iron Age, around the 10th century until the 8th century BCE and beyond. There is no definitive proof that the statues are contemporary with the burials, but a prevailing hypothesis suggests that they were placed near the tombs. The commissioners of Mont'e Prama were likely members of an aristocratic family or a coalition of noble families, asserting their ethnic and cultural preeminence through the structure, the layout of the necropolis, the inclusion of symbolic elements, such as the Nuragic models, and the conspicuous glorification of their religious devotion and warrior values. These features reinforce their deep-rooted dominion of the region. The rule of the Genos is evoked through the military symbolism of warrior ancestors, whose representation were closely associated with the burial of high-status individuals. The visual narrative served to legitimize a new form of social supremacy. The notable presence of archers at Mont'e Prama underscores that archery was an aristocratic pursuit. From this perspective, it is evident that a deliberate manipulation of collective perception was at play, achieved through the imposition of symbols with strong ideological significance aligned with the ruling class's worldview. The bronze figurines, therefore, stand as clear evidence of how the elite celebrated and projected their power. The increasing use of human form in Nuragic sculpture reflects the evolving social dynamics within the Proto-Sardinian society, serving as an idealized representation of these changes. This artistic trend appears to have developed alongside the growing aristocratization of social structures. The human figures in these sculptures can be interpreted as expressions of a new era, symbolizing the exclusive dominance of certain noble families who controlled both political and religious authority. The prominent display of military symbols and insignia suggests that these representations were exclusive of the warrior elite, with each figure visually conveying rank and social rule. It is also likely that the attire depicted in these sculptures was reserved for ceremonial occasions. For example, the long-horned helmets worn by archers were probably parade helmets rather than practical battle gear. Similarly, the highly ornate armor, likely impractical for combat, served to emphasize the ritualistic and symbolic significance.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce to the lectern Peter van Dommelen, who joins us today from Brown University, where he is the Joukowsky Family Professor of Archaeology and Professor of Anthropology. Peter is both a Mediterranean archaeologist, which to be clear, does not simply mean that he works in the Mediterranean, but it really rather that he truly works quite across the Mediterranean. And as well is one of the foremost experts on Sardinia itself. In Sardinia, his long-term fieldwork is concentrated on the first millennium BCE, with a special interest in the intersections and connections of colonial and indigenous peoples. He has led several archaeological excavations at Teralba, and more recently, and still ongoing, at the Nuragic site of Suraki at San Viromilis, maybe 15 kilometers or so away from Mont'e Prama. To summarize his publications is to do disservice not just to their number, but all the more so to their impact on our field. Peter doesn't just publish lots, they're all, to the last, invaluable contributions to big and complex topics and across multiple languages. His On Colonial Grounds, which I go way back into his earlier career, he'll wonder why, I do single it out because it is, I would argue, really a book that is quite ahead of its time. And considered a must-read for anyone who wants to think about colonialism and rural settlements in Sardinia and indeed beyond. I'll also add his Rural Landscapes of the Punic World, and from his many edited volumes, there's his and Bernie Knapp's Cambridge Prehistory of the Bronze and Iron Age Mediterranean. Last, as one of our field's most highly respected scholars, his time and expertise is clearly sought after. I note he's had visiting appointments, and you know, is there really anything more meaningful academic honor than having a visiting appointment at another university? But he's enjoyed these stints at the universities of Valencia, Cagliari, the Balearics, the German Archaeological Institute in Berlin, and most recently at the Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona. From personal experience with Peter, it's not just his scholarship that they're after, but also his collegiality and intellectual spirit of cooperation and mentorship. My own work in Sardinia, for example, owes an enormous debt of gratitude to Peter. All this to underline the great pleasure it gives me to welcome him to the lectern now. Peter.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Steve, for a generous introduction. First, see, it's a big arrow. Yes, that's the one. Just a moment. Okay, so first of all, my thanks as well as the previous speakers to Barbara Faedda, Paolo Carta and the Italian Academy's institution for the invitation to come here. And also I want to mention Abigail Escher for sorting out the logistics, which in this case for me were a little bit easier, just down the road, but still. It is most of all always a pleasure here to return to the Italian Academy, especially for a Sardinian discussion. It's a privilege to come up here and meet with American, Italian, and especially Sardinian colleagues and friends. And finally, it is also always a pleasure to be invited to speak about the Sardinian Iron Age, and even more so at Mont'e Prama, because that also means Suraki is not going to be too far off. So today we're here, first of all, for a celebration of 50 years of Mont'e Prama since the start of the excavations there. And that is the reason that I'm starting here with this view across the Stagno di Cabras. And although I should say, those of you who know the area might have noted, Mont'e Prama itself would actually not be on this slide, it'd just be off to the side, but you know, that's not the point here. But since we are here gathered at the American Academy, I think, or I'm convinced we are here to do more than just celebrate Mont'e Prama and its statues. And I've therefore come with two somewhat larger aims. My first aim regards a theme that I've been speaking and writing about for some time now, and that concerns Mont'e Prama directly, as I've been arguing that we need to look beyond the site and beyond the statues. Because yes, the statues are absolutely amazing, but no, they're not unique. They're part of a wider context that is historically situated in a specific place and in a specific time. Those places are the Sinis, Sardinia, the wider Mediterranean, and the times are those of the Iron Age. I think that most people will know by now that the statues, and we've actually just seen that in Anna Depalmas' presentation, that the statues are iconographically very close to the Bronzetti. But we need to take that further, and we should ask what that means. It is evident by now that Mont'e Prama has strong local roots, but how and from where did those roots grow? My second aim here tonight is thematic, and I think it is, I hope, it is well in line with today's event, as I also want to speak specifically about celebrating the past, but you will find out precisely what I mean as we go along. So I've organized my presentation as follows. I'm beginning, Yeah, there we go. I'm beginning with the discussion of the wider context of Mont'e Prama under the heading of connectivity. Then I turn to examine those local routes that I mentioned. The central part of my talk is then dedicated to the role that the past played specifically at Mont'e Prama and in the Iron Age, and I will conclude with a reflection on what I have termed Nuragic nostalgia. I want to start with the wider context of Mont'e Prama. My colleague Alfonso Stiglitz and I have previously written about the landscapes of the Sinis, well, including in the Italian Academy book, including explicitly Nuraga Suraki and the rich Iron Age context that we have brought to light over the past 10 years. Today, I want to look even more widely, and I want to examine the connections beyond Sardinia. Connectivity is the key word that sums up a major topic in academic debates about the Mediterranean of the past 2 decades. And the Iron Age has been at the forefront of many of those debates. And we can actually see that immediately in Sardinia and specifically at Mont'e Prama. Just look at the center of my slide. You will see the scarab from Tomb 25 at Mont'e Prama, which clearly is a long-distance import coming from either Cyprus or the Levantine coast. The same provenance and chronology also come with the timiaterion, or so-called torch holder, the object on the right at the top, that had been found at Suraki, and which incidentally gives us yet another connection between these 2 sites. But once we start looking for these connections, the evidence we see quickly is abundant. On the left here, there's this Phoenician Levantine style bronze statuette from Santa Cristina, and there are actually 3 more of those roughly from that site. And then there is the well-known bronze miniature boats that are mostly found in Sardinia itself. Anna Depalmas mentioned them as well, and I show you here one from Bultei. Let me see. And needless to say, they're mostly found in Sardinia, but they nevertheless clearly point to maritime activities. And some of them are also found overseas, as we saw. There is actually much more stuff, Sardinian stuff, to be found overseas. And even if the late Bronze Age material that now come to light in Crete, Cyprus, and even Syria, that tends to get more attention, that is really just about a handful of sherds and pots, whereas the Iron Age evidence by now is much more extensive and much more numerous. It covers the entire southern West Mediterranean, the coasts of Iberia, the Maghreb, and Sicily, and it is found in both Phoenician and in indigenous contexts, such as Cadiz, Phoenician Gadir, and the indigenous site at the Malaga airport, better known as La Rebanadia. This final observation is crucial because we need not and we cannot assume that Phoenicians did all the moving of these objects around the Mediterranean. And I think in this context, we don't need even begin to speak about Greeks being involved, as in this context at this time, they're simply not in the picture to begin with. Quite a few of these connections that I touched on may well have been directly managed and maintained between indigenous communities on either side. And most likely, these were all very complex collaborations of people of all kinds of backgrounds. And that is, in fact, what we can see in shipwrecks elsewhere in the Mediterranean. Our own excavations at Nuraga Suraki that you see here have brought to light a quite different and quite remarkable example of connectivity. As we have found that you see in the photo and in the drawing, we have found a defensive ditch that followed the antemurale, the defensive wall, around the Nuraga to defend it. Such ditches were unknown in Nuragic Sardinia, but they were frequent on the Iberian Peninsula in both Phoenician and indigenous contexts. And it is the same context that I mentioned earlier where we find Iron Age Nuragic pottery. Just by way of example, this is one of those Phoenician ditches at the site of Cabezo Pequeño, south of Alicante on the Iberian coast. Plenty of reasons, therefore, to look more closely and especially more widely at Mediterranean connectivity. And a good starting point we have in this map, which is a conventional map of Greek and Phoenician commercial and colonial expansion. But that is not how I want to read this map. What strikes me on this map are not the green and the pink areas, but the large white spaces. There are many more blank spaces on this map than there are green and pink ones. And I think those blank ones, those blank spaces, are the ones that we want to focus on. And if we focus on these blank spaces, we are effectively reading this map against the grain, as post-colonial scholars say, reading between the lines and teasing out what is not said, what is not colored, what is left blank on this map. And what is not said, what is not written in the legend of this map, is that all these blank spaces are other peoples, other Iron Age societies, other Iron Age communities, who we don't know by their names in most cases, but who were still there. You may have noted that Sardinia on this map is colored green, which I think most of us in this room here would agree with me is a mistake. The island was never entirely Phoenician, neither politically, nor militarily, nor culturally. But in my post-colonial reading, these blank spaces, and I would then include Sardinia, represent a multitude of different Iron Age societies. While historians and classicists may not be so clear about these spaces, that's why they're left blank, archaeologists know one thing for sure, which is that all these spaces represent very different were very different spaces, and that they constituted their own worlds, cultural worlds and societies, despite the uniform blank color that we see on this map. This is an important point that I'm insisting on because it begins to make us aware of the great cultural and political diversity that existed throughout the Iron Age Mediterranean. And it tells us that we do not need to think just of Phoenician, or later on Greek, connections to explain the distribution of all these objects overseas. So let's forget about Greeks and Phoenicians and let's talk about indigenous Iron Age, starting in Sardinia. So, returning to Mont'e Prama, therefore. If we want to understand indigenous connectivity across the Mediterranean, we need to understand those local Iron Age contexts in all their nuances. And this brings us obviously back to the key question at Mont'e Prama. Why these statues? And note that I'm not asking where these statues came from, as we know that very well. The iconography of the statues, as again we've just seen, is Nuragic and island-wide on Sardinia. So let's take a closer look at the bronzetti. Well, you'll see many of them reappearing here. So let's take a closer look at them because they cover many subjects, as has been well documented and as we've seen in much more detail just before. As far as we understand our subjects, we can confidently say that the themes range from everyday life to persons of power and also including those persons, figures that were the stuff of myths, whether they were ancestors, heroes, or deities. Well, there's some dispute about their chronology, as Ana Depalmas explained with much more detail and authority. There can be no doubt that they were essentially an Iron Age phenomenon. And given their obvious connection with Mont'e Prama, we really do need to understand them better. Referring to the iconography is just not enough. And again, that's what we saw in the previous lecture. What is much more secure is that, let me see, the bronzetti also include Nuragi and of course the boats that I already mentioned and also that we saw before. Since Nuragi and boats are the only type of construction, the only object that is included, is represented in miniature, because all the others are living beings, whether persons or animals or deities or so. It's the boats and Nuragi are the only ones that are things, objects, constructions. They clearly must be significant and important. Numerically, Nuragi and boats are substantial subcategories of the bronzetti as a whole, which again underlines how significant they were for Iron Age Sardinians. I would like to suggest that the prominence of the boats confirms the importance of the overseas connections in the Iron Age, which were important, as I was explaining with other arguments earlier. And the one you see here itself comes in fact from overseas. It comes from the Hera sanctuary at Croton in South Italy. The Nuragi miniatures are even more interesting, as the appearance of these miniatures in the Iron Age is believed to have coincided more or less with the time that real life-size Nuragi were no longer being built. That doesn't mean that Nuragi were no longer important at that time, or that they were even no longer inhabited, as has been suggested by some. But careful excavation in recent years is increasingly demonstrating that many Nuragi did remain continuously occupied, more or less continuously. There is some evidence that they perhaps were no longer being built, but that evidence is still a little bit more out for judiction. What is much more secure, however, is that the Iron Age nuraghi stood no longer at the center of Nuragic settlements, as large settlements were built around the nuraghi, the pre-existing nuraghi, and those large settlements were defined by two more innovations, and we can see that very clearly here at Nuragic, the so-called courtyard houses and the so-called meeting huts. What is really interesting, and here we're looking at the meeting hut at Palmavera, what is really interesting about these meeting huts, that they are stylized and life-size copies of the roundhouses, the so-called huts of the Bronze Age, where in the Bronze Age people lived in those huts. They were domestic spaces in the Bronze Age, but that function of domestic living spaces was transferred in the Iron Age to the new courtyard houses. And those older roundhouses were used for special roles, for communal, for public meetings, and for rituals. And it is right here, as you can see on this photo, that we find within that ritualized life-size roundhouse referring to the past, that we find miniature nuraghi in stone rather than in bronze. The only other place where we find bronzetti, boats and nuraghi included, really the main context for finding these things, as far as we know contexts, are regional sanctuaries across the island, several of which including meeting huts as well. And the key term that I would like to associate with the bronzetti, therefore, is that of display, showing off. And it is right, and more likely, as Carlo Tronchetti has argued convincingly, power and display in the Iron Age. If we then go back to Mont'e Prama again, we begin to distinguish a really interesting pattern here. While we cannot be sure on the one hand about the location, about the setup of the statues, it is safe to say that display, instilling awe, making an impression, were at the heart of what these statues are about. Precisely perhaps the same reason why people today are so impressed by these statues, as we've seen in many museum exhibitions. But there is more at Mont'e Prama. Even if building A, at the left top there, has not preserved any Iron Age evidence, it is hard to escape the conclusion that it was something, at least, like a meeting hut. There is moreover the association with the past, the Nuragic past specifically, as the 33 graves of the monumental face, the so-called tombe tronchetti, that go with the statues, are surrounded by older burials of comparable types. They were likely the resting places of prominent people, just like those buried in the monumental phase were. If you then add to this the 60+ miniatures of nuraghi in stone, we get to see a complex picture that not only references the past in multiple ways, but it also acts in the present with multiple simboli di potere, as Carlo Tronchetti would put it. And when I say the present, I of course mean the present of the Iron Age at that point. So we're talking about the past in the past, as perceived. Because Mont'e Prama did not exist in a vacuum, other sites nearby can help us to understand what was going on, and Nuragic has yielded evidence that does precisely that. First, we return to the antemurale that here you see in the field, and to the defensive ditch that I already mentioned and that offered us evidence of long-distance overseas contacts. The antemurale, with which the ditch is closest associated, they were built together, is in many ways the opposite of the ditch, as it is firmly rooted in Nuragic architecture, except that unlike all the other examples in Sardinia that tend to be dated to the late Bronze Age, the one at Nuragic was built towards the end of the 8th century, beginning in the end of the 8th century, several centuries later than the rest. That is an anomaly for sure, but in the context of what we actually have just seen at Mont'e Prama, there's a really intriguing parallel, namely that of an older Nuragic construction, here at Nuragic, presumably a multi-towered nuraghe, that was incorporated into an Iron Age construction, very much like the meeting houses that I showed at Nuragic that reinvent, or showed at Palmavera, that reinvent the old roundhouses, or like at Mont'e Prama, the giganti that reinvent the bronzetti. And in this same way, the Nuragic antemurale with its ditch reinvents the traditional Nuragic antemurale. In this light, it is hardly surprising, I would argue, that both the layout and the size of the Iron Age antemurale at Nuragic are also unusual. It constitutes, and you can just see that in the plan there, it constitutes an almost perfectly round circle that is very different from the organically shaped traditional antemurali walls that that you normally see in complex nuraghi, and it also includes 10 towers at a very regular distance. At a short distance from the nuraghe, excavation area F has yielded more remarkable evidence that underscores the dynamic and the inventive nature of the Iron Age. This is about the building in the red circle that dates to the 7th, 6th century. So it's about one and a half, perhaps 2 centuries later than the Antemurale and Mont'e Prama. In close-up, we can see that this is an oval-shaped building with, where the arrow shows you, a monumental entrance flanked by flagstones and at least one stone bench along a wall, indicated by the line. Outside, there's a carefully paved area with a well and various stone channels. And if all of this begins to sound as the description of a meeting hut, then this is confirmed by the presence of these stone little altars. It doesn't end here, though, as the oval shape already suggests that this is not a canonical meeting hut. It's oval rather than round, in fact. And I sort of also prefer here the term meeting house, because the rest of the construction is also not exactly regular. These are the burned remains of wooden beams and of mud bricks that show that the upper part of this building was constructed in Phoenician architectural tradition with mud bricks and with a flat roof. It thus innovatively combined older architectural traditions, not just those from the late Bronze Age, but also those from the first Iron Age, with new outside features. And the finds, to conclude, firmly confirm the special nature of the building, as they combine heavily decorated late Iron Age finewares with imported pottery from a variety of places, including Phoenician Sicily, North Africa, and Etruria, as well as some Greek material, which again underscores the continued connectivity of the Sardinian Iron Age. Summing up then, I want to emphasize that the Iron Age and the later inhabitants of Soraki lived literally among the ruins and on top of earlier constructions, just as the deceased at Mont'e Prama were buried amidst older burials. Just as the past, specifically the Nuragic past, was clearly very important for the Iron Age inhabitants of Sardinia, but that doesn't mean that they were fossilized and only imitated that past. On the contrary, I hope to have shown in particular that first, in the Iron Age Sardinians stood, so to speak, with one leg in the past, but with the other one firmly in the contemporary Mediterranean. They were well connected with the rest of the Mediterranean and did not shy away from bringing home innovations they saw elsewhere and they thought useful. And secondly, that memory, local memory in particular, played a prominent role in this process of creative adoption, imitation and creative invention, a process that I argue became ever more important in Iron Age Sardinia to the point that I think it merits the label nostalgic, and at times perhaps even something of an obsession. To conclude and to reinforce my final point about Nuragic nostalgia, I'm going to fast forward to the late 20th and early 21st centuries Common Era. That is the past of the past 50 years that we are celebrating today, basically to say that we are living another episode of Nuragic nostalgia today. But now it is one fueled by social media and with institutional encouragement, which may be turning it perhaps in something more like a Nuragic mania. Look no further than this polystyrene copy of a Mont'e Prama statue in the supermarket in Oristano, where it promotes local produce like wine, sausage, pasta, ceramics, believing, or at least signaling, that if the soil of the Cenis produced such magnificent statues, then the rural produce from that area must be of similar quality. In fact, it is not exaggerated to say that the Nuragic past has become a seal of authenticity in Sardinia. This development has been slowly developing over the past century. It's nothing new in many ways, but it is in the last 2 decades that it has snowballed. It is now not at all an exaggeration to say that the past has come back, in particular the Nuragic past. The visual language of the Nuragic past has become familiar to all, and there's interest in and knowledge of the prehistoric past in a way that is unprecedented in extent and in manner. At the heart of this tumultuous development stands the site of Mont'e Prama, and by now we might also say the phenomenon of Mont'e Prama. The Cagliari soccer team now plays with the statues on their shirts, and ever-increasing numbers of visitors make the trek to Cabras. The private and business worlds on the island have also realized the strength of the past, particularly in Cabras and the Oristanese. The very precise reference, like the comment that we see here, Io resto a Cabras, also suggests that there is a public around there that is very well informed about the political events and the political debates that surround the statues of Mont'e Prama. And I want to end then by emphasizing that what we have seen in the past 15 years or so, that is the search, the exploration of anchoring a regional identity in the past, is not something that is so particularly different in Sardinia from elsewhere in the Mediterranean and Europe more widely. But what distinguishes the Sardinian case, the Sardinian developments, are the strong and the specific focus on the Nuragic past and the breadth and the depth of its social impact. Prehistory is now synonymous with the Nuragic period, even if it is freely mixed with other periods, as we can see in contemporary artistic productions that are combining a traditional craft, a more recent traditional craft like pottery production, with Nuragic, or at least Nuragic-inspired, forms and themes. I therefore think that it is appropriate to capture these 21st century processes of reproductions, appropriations, and reinventions of the Nuragic past with the term of Nuragic nostalgia, in the same way as I proposed it earlier for understanding the Nuragic Iron Age. In so doing, I am not suggesting, I want to emphasize, I am not suggesting that these processes are identical, because these periods are obviously very different. But I do suggest that there are instructive comparisons to be made between the Iron Age and the last 50 years or so that will help us to understand these processes of anchoring identities in the past. And who knows, perhaps there is an element of recognition among today's visitors and islanders that sparks all the interest in the site and statues of Mont'e Prama and the Nuragic past more widely. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. It gives me great pleasure now to welcome Ilaria Orri, who comes to us from the Fondazione Mont'e Prama, where she's one of their lead archaeologists. And from my own work with the Fondazione, it is hard to underscore just how important she is to the success of the organization. Ilaria is an expert on Sardinian archaeology, particularly the area of the Sinis Peninsula, and so the Punic Roman city of Tharos and the Mont'e Prama itself, with various special interests, including the Phoenician cults at Tharos. She has published very widely, particularly on these cults and their archaeology at Tharos, and some of the publications, I must say, are sort of required reading from our own team working on the site. Ilaria now travels far and wide to curate conferences, to implement educational programs, and to present the extraordinary archaeological heritage of the Sinis Peninsula, and not least the sites of Tharos and Mont'e Prama. That we have her here today is a great privilege and a great pleasure. So, benvenuta Ilaria, siamo tutti così contenti che tu sei qui.
Buon pomeriggio a tutti, sono molto onorata di partecipare a questo evento qui, in questo prestigioso luogo, qui a raccontarvi della mia terra, la penisola del Sinis, luogo che ha conservato una delle scoperte più importanti che l'ha portata alla ribalta nazionale e internazionale. Siamo qui appunto per il 50° anniversario della scoperta del sito di Mont'e Prama, situato nella penisola del Sinis, una regione della costa centro-occidentale sarda. Questa scoperta è avvenuta per caso nel marzo del 1974, quando l'aratro di un contadino portò in luce alcune pietre scolpite. Ecco Mont'e Prama oggi. Qua vediamo Mont'e Prama nel 1968, quando ancora l'aratro non aveva portato in luce nessun elemento particolare. Questa immagine mostra Mont'e Prama prima di diventare uno dei siti archeologici più importanti della Sardegna. Nell'anno successivo alla sua scoperta, nel 1975, la soprintendenza archeologica decise di intervenire subito, inviando sull'area l'archeologo Alessandro Bedini, che vediamo qui all'opera. Nei pochi giorni di scavo concessi, lo studioso pensava di trovarsi alla presenza di un tempio o di uno spazio sacro. Con l'avanzare degli scavi però non furono rinvenute evidenze di un luogo di culto, bensì una necropoli. Bedini durante i suoi scavi non rinvenne frammenti di statue a figura umana. Si susseguirono in quegli anni diverse indagini. Nel gennaio del 1977, nel saggio di un solo giorno, diretto da Giovanni Lilliu e Enrico Azzeni, vennero recuperati dei frammenti di statuaria, tra i quali una testa. Nel dicembre dello stesso anno, una serie di saggi furono condotti da Maria Luisa Ferrarese Cerutti, Università di Cagliari, e prima donna archeologa a scavare a Mont'e Prama, insieme a Carlo Tronchetti, Soprintendenza Archeologica. Come si può vedere dagli immagini, gli elementi che un tempo componevano le statue a figura umana iniziano ad essere messi in luce in maggior numero, come i busti di 2 statue. Nel 1979 la prima campagna di scavo sistematica è diretta da Carlo Tronchetti, sempre Scavi Soprintendenza. In questa immagine vediamo dei giovani archeologi, oggi importanti studiosi del panorama nazionale e internazionale del patrimonio sardo, tra i quali un giovane laureando, Raimondo Zucca, e la seconda archeologa che scavò a Mont'e Prama, Emina Usai. Queste prime indagini archeologiche hanno permesso di rilevare una necropoli in uso per alcuni secoli. La fase più antica si data dal 1050 al 950 a.C., mentre quella più recente dal 950 al 900 a.C. al 750-730 a.C. circa. L'ultima e più significativa è quella monumentale, che vede la copertura con lastre quadrate delle tombe a pozzetto verticale scavate nella roccia, che sono profonde circa 80 centimetri, dove i defunti venivano deposti seduti, con le gambe rannicchiate sotto il volto e architettonicamente disposti sul lungo percorso rettilineo adornati appunto dalle monumentali statue. Dal punto di vista dell'analisi antropologica, il dato di grande interesse è che ancora una volta sembra che nella necropoli trovassero sepoltura quasi esclusivamente maschi, giovani adulti o adolescenti. Un'ulteriore osservazione è la notevole differenza nel grado di usura tra i denti anteriori, molto consumati rispetto a quelli posteriori. Tale differenza è stata spiegata dalla studiosa Ornella Afonso come conseguenza di una determinata abitudine alimentare o dell'uso extraalimentare dei denti, cioè del loro utilizzo come strumenti per stringere, bloccare o ammorbidire qualcosa. Inoltre, nel sito sono presenti anche delle strutture scavate tra il 2015 e il 2016, una costruzione circolare nuragica, l'edificio A, e un piccolo edificio nuragico adiacente all'edificio B. L'edificio A forse originariamente era destinato a funzioni cerimoniali, fu ristrutturato sempre in epoca nuragica, successivamente svuotato e rioccupato in epoca punica come abitazione. Presenta una forma circolare di notevole ampiezza e solidità, è realizzato in blocchi di basalto di grandi e medie dimensioni. Attualmente però non è possibile determinare con certezza il periodo della sua costruzione. L'edificio B invece, i cui resti non erano visibili prima degli scavi, è addossato all'edificio A. È presente dimensioni più ridotte a quest'ultimo, costruito e utilizzato in età nuragica, non fu rioccupato in epoca punica, conservando così intatta la stratificazione nuragica risalente alla prima età del ferro. Entrambe le strutture erano probabilmente connesse alle pratiche che venivano svolte all'interno della necropoli. Nell'ultima campagna di scavo, 2023-2024, è stato messo in luce un allineamento di buche di palo, evidenziati in rosso, per le quali ancora non conosciamo la funzione. Come oramai è noto, ciò che ha reso maggiormente celebre il sito di Mont'e Prama è stato il ritrovamento dei frammenti scultorei. Nelle campagne degli anni 70 sono stati recuperati 5.178 frammenti, rinvenuti in modo sparso, frammentato, disordinato, condizioni che ha reso difficile l'interpretazione e l'assemblamento. Nonostante ciò, alcune tra quelle meglio conservate vennero già esposte al pubblico al Museo Archeologico di Cagliari. Un'immagine simbolo dell'importante progetto di restauro compiuto tra il 2007 e il 2011 al centro di restauro di Lipunti a Sassari, qui dove avvenne la grande opera di costruzione, seppur non completa, delle statue. In questa fase la popolazione nuragica del Sinis volle esaltare la propria posizione sociale attraverso la realizzazione di un grande complesso scultoreo, conosciuto oggi con il nome di Giganti di Mont'e Prama. Si tratta di statue a tutto tondo, che rappresentano arcieri, pugilatori e guerrieri, accompagnati da altre sculture come i bettili e i modelli di nuraghe. Le statue di giganti sono la più antica testimonianza monumentale con rappresentazioni umane nel Mediterraneo occidentale e hanno permesso agli archeologi oggi e a tutti noi di poter ammirare la figura di un personaggio della Sardegna nuragica di 3.000 anni fa. Gli scavi nel sito archeologico ripresero nel 2014 e sono tuttora in corso. Hanno portato alla luce nuovi frammenti di statue che arricchiscono ulteriormente il patrimonio scultoreo, il quale oggi conta di 31 statue a figura umana. I pugilatori, che caratterizzati da una posa statica e rituale, hanno uno scudo sollevato sopra la testa e un braccio armato di una sorta di guanto con punta sporgente, il torso è nudo e indossa solamente un gonnellino a punta sul retro, tenuto da una fascia, una cintura che sul retro termina a forma da W. Ed ecco il nuovo tipo emerso nel 2014, del quale ancora non si aveva conoscenza. Pugilatore del tipo cavalupo. Il braccio destro guantato lo identifica come un pugilatore, ma si differenzia dal precedente tipo per la presenza dello scudo verticale avvolgente. Il nome deriva dalla somiglianza iconografica con il bronzetto di Cavalupo Vulci nel Lazio. Gli arcieri, che sono quelli dotati di arco nella mano sinistra, e di faretra sulla schiena. Indossano una corta tunica, protetti da una placca addominale e dai schinieri nelle gambe. Hanno un'ulteriore protezione nel braccio, una sorta di guaina decorata con motivi geometrici, mentre la mano destra è sollevata in un gesto di saluto. I guerrieri, come gli arcieri, indossano un elmo crestato cornuto ed una corta tunica. Questa mostra i dettagli di una sorta di una corazza nella parte superiore del corpo e di una stola con frange e motivi geometrici che cade sul gonnellino. Ulteriori dettagli dell'equipaggiamento sono lo scudo circolare nella mano sinistra, mentre nella destra dovrebbe impugnare una spada. Come già accennato, il complesso scultoreo di Mont'e Prama è composto anche dai modelli di nuraghe e dai bettili. Sono 21 i modelli di nuraghe, rappresentano una celebrazione simbolica dell'elemento più emblematico della civiltà nuragica. Non si hanno solo in pietra, ma sono stati rinvenuti modelli di nuraghe anche in terracotta, in bronzo. Non si tratta di raffigurazioni dettagliate, bensì di una interpretazione stilistica schematica che esalta gli aspetti peculiari del nuraghe. Il riferimento di questi reperti è molto importante dal punto di vista storico per la ricostruzione architettonica delle strutture antiche, in quanto i modelli restituiscono l'aspetto originario dei nuraghi, che noi diversamente non potremmo conoscere in quanto ormai crollati o rovinati dal tempo. Possiamo ricostruire, per esempio, dal punto di vista architettonico, la parte terminale di una torre di un nuraghe, che doveva essere sormontata da un terrazzo pavimentato in legno, poggiante su dei mensoloni in pietra e circondato da un parapetto anch'esso in legno. Mentre i bettili, sono 16, sono sculture astratte in pietra di forma troncoconica, interpretate come raffigurazione simbolica delle divinità. Essi sono tra i primi reperti litici ad essere stati ritrovati nel sito. Sono elementi comuni nelle sepolture dell'età nuragica, il nome Betilo dal termine ebraico Betel, che significa casa di Dio. Un'interpretazione li considera come più antichi rispetto alle statue antropomorfe e ritiene che siano stati spostati dalle più antiche tombe di giganti dell'età del bronzo al momento dell'erezione della necropoli. Un'altra ipotesi invece propone che questi siano stati appositamente lavorati con materiale diverso in arenaria rispetto al calcare delle statue per queste sepolture. Ad ogni modo, questi elementi collocati in prossimità delle tombe come segnacoli delle stesse avevano ragionevolmente anche il fine di monumentalizzare l'area per celebrare i defunti deposti nelle tombe, probabili esponenti di un ceto aristocratico a cui venivano riservate sepolture singole. Tuttora in corso la ricerca a Mont'e Prama non solo nel campo ma anche in laboratorio. La Fondazione continua a fare rete e collabora con gli uffici periferici del Ministero della Cultura. Sono partiti a marzo del 2024 a Cabras, negli spazi del museo, i lavori di restauro delle sculture rinvenute nelle campagne di scavo 2014 e 2016. Questi lavori sono progettati e diretti dalla Soprintendenza Archeologica. I visitatori hanno la possibilità di vedere attraverso pannelli trasparenti i lavori di restauro. Questa opera di restauro coordinata dalla Soprintendenza avrà anche uno spazio dedicato, sempre all'interno del museo a breve. La valorizzazione del sito passa anche attraverso l'apertura del sito alle visite guidate. Chi è andato a visitare il sito durante gli ultimi scavi ha avuto anche la possibilità di interloquire con gli archeologi sul campo ed essere aggiornati in diretta di ciò che accadeva. Sul sito di Mont'e Prama è presente anche un centro servizi. La struttura rappresenta un primo passo verso la musealizzazione dell'area, ospita la biglietteria, uno spazio di lavoro per gli archeologi e le archeologhe e le persone che lavorano a Mont'e Prama, offrendo appunto diversi comfort. Tra le grandi opere che verranno realizzate a breve, una grande innovazione senza dubbio è rappresentata dal battello elettrico che condurrà i visitatori dalla peschiera di Cabras, collocata vicino al museo di Cabras, fino al sito di Mont'e Prama, che è posto sul lato opposto dello stagno. Questa è una novità importante sia per la fruibilità, ma soprattutto anche dal punto di vista della sostenibilità, perché prevederà poi la realizzazione di una comunità energetica che coinvolgerà diverse aree del territorio di Cabras. Per il raggiungimento di questo obiettivo è stato stipulato un accordo con il consorzio Pontis, che è composto dalle 11 cooperative che lavorano nello stagno. Questo è un evento storico per tutta la comunità di Cabras. Per quanto riguarda invece l'ambito della ricerca, la Fondazione dall'ottobre scorso ha iniziato le operazioni di prospezione nello stagno. La ricerca è una delle missioni della Fondazione che porta avanti sotto la direzione scientifica sia della Fondazione ma anche in collaborazione delle Università degli Studi di Salento, Sassari e Cagliari e del Politecnico di Torino. Le operazioni hanno interessato alcune zone di questo importante specchio d'acqua, da sempre fondamentale per l'economia del territorio. L'indagine si è concentrata in prossimità dell'area archeologica di Mont'e Prama, più a sud in una località chiamata Concheilloni, già conosciuta per la presenza di materiali del periodo preistorico, e un'altra zona chiamata Isariedus, dove la presenza di materiali di diverse epoche sembrerebbe documentare le tipiche attività di scambio, imbarco e stoccaggio tipiche appunto di aree portuali e di approdo. Un ulteriore passo in avanti nella ricerca è la richiesta di concessione di scavo al Nuragic a Nevadosu. Collocato circa a 700 metri dal sito di Mont'e Prama, questa imponente struttura potrebbe fornire informazioni sia riguardo l'epoca nuragica nel territorio, ma anche in merito alla vicina necropoli. Questa importante campagna di scavo offrirà per la prima volta la possibilità di riportare in luce un nuraghe che doveva essere sormontato da un terrazzo, un nuraghe del Sinis di Cabras, con l'obiettivo in futuro di essere appunto fruibile. In merito alla musealizzazione, la Fondazione ha fortemente voluto, in onore alle celebrazioni del 50° anniversario della scoperta del sito di Mont'e Prama, una nuova esposizione del complesso scultoreo. Fin dalla sua prima esposizione nel Museo Civico di Cabras, il complesso scultoreo era diviso in 3 diverse sale, una che accoglieva 6 dei 28 giganti rinvenuti negli scavi degli anni 70, un'altra era dedicata invece ai 4 modelli di Nuragic provenienti sempre dalle prime campagne di scavo e l'ultima ospitava invece le sculture provenienti dalle ricerche del 2014 in poi. Nel marzo del 2024, in occasione di questa celebrazione, la Fondazione ha voluto rinnovare l'esposizione riunendo tutte le sculture fino ad ora presenti all'interno del museo in un'unica sala, la Sala del Paesaggio. All'interno di questo ambiente le sculture presentano una disposizione nuova, non sono più attaccate alla parete come nelle sale precedenti, ma sono distribuite nello spazio in modo tale da consentire ai visitatori di osservarli a 360 gradi. Questa nuova esposizione vede le statue volgere lo sguardo direttamente verso il sito di Mont'e Prama, creando così una connessione tra le sculture e il luogo dove sono nate e dove sono state ritrovate. La Fondazione in questi mesi si sta adoperando anche alla realizzazione di nuovi spazi per poter unire il complesso scultoreo a Cabras entro la fine dell'anno. Il nostro viaggio continua con tante altre belle iniziative, con nuove avventure da affrontare. Vi ringrazio per questa opportunità e per l'attenzione. Grazie.
Thank you, Ilaria. Grazie. We have now for our final presentation Seán Hemingway, who comes to us from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where he is the John A. and Carol O. Moran Curator in charge of Greek and Roman art. With a PhD from Bryn Mawr and stints at the American School of Classical Studies at Athens as a Fulbright and the American Academy in Rome as a visiting curator, Seán has since built an impressive record of archaeological research and publication. With special interests in bronzes and with experience in archaeological excavations, Seán has published several important works, much of it on his expertise in Hellenistic art, as well as his work at the Bronze Age site of Palikastro on Crete. But I also single out from among his several publications his book on the horse and the jockey from Artemisian, as well as another on how to read Greek sculpture. And a quite recent book on Cycladic art. The list is long, and even a novel on the tomb of Alexander. Given his busy role at the Met, it's a wonder he has published as much as he has, but it also underscores the honor it is to have him with us today. With that, I would like to welcome Seán for our final presentation on Mont'e Prama and the Met, a new international collaboration. Seán.
Thank you, Steve. As a universal museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art endeavors to represent the art of all cultures throughout the course of history. The ancient Mediterranean world is divided among several different curatorial departments. The ancient Near East, Egyptian, Greek and Roman, and prehistoric Europe falls under the medieval department. My talk this evening will give you a sense of our collections and how we present the art of the ancient Mediterranean world. In particular, I want to show you the importance of international collaborations for the Greek and Roman department and provide some context for the new Memorandum of Understanding that the Met is signing tomorrow with the Mont'e Prama Foundation. Located on 4 city blocks and nestled on the east side of Central Park, the Metropolitan Museum of Art was founded in 1870. The museum grew organically over its 155-year history. Our mission statement is to collect, study, conserve, and present significant works of art across time and cultures in order to connect all people to creativity, knowledge, ideas, and one another. The Met collection includes over 70,000 antiquities. Today, tens of thousands of objects are on view at any given time in the museum's 2 million square foot building. Two great wings of the museum on the first floor represent the artistic accomplishments of ancient Egypt and the ancient Greek and Roman civilizations. The Met collection of ancient Egyptian art consists of approximately 30,000 objects of artistic, historic, and cultural importance, dating from about 300,000 BCE to the 4th century CE. A significant percentage of the collection is derived from the museum's 3 decades of archaeological work in Egypt, initiated in 1906 in response to increasing interest in the culture of ancient Egypt. The display is presented chronologically from the pre-dynastic period through the period of Roman imperial occupation. At the entrance in the reconstruction of a funerary chapel is the reconstruction of a funerary chapel to Perneb, which you see here. The visitor may go left and experience works from the Roman period, then Ptolemaic, Hellenistic, and so on, proceeding like an archaeologist from the latest levels to the earliest. Or begin with pre-dynastic on the right and continue around in a large loop, ending back in the Roman period. One of the most memorable episodes in the history of archaeology was the discovery and exploration of the tomb of the Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun, who ruled in the 14th century BCE. Discovered in 1922 by British archaeologist Howard Carter and his benefactor, Lord Carnarvon, the tomb's 4 chambers were crammed with spectacular objects. The clearance of the tomb unfolded over a period of 10 years. Each step was documented by British archaeological photographer Harry Burton, a member of the Metropolitan Museum's Egyptian expedition, who had joined Carter and was entrusted with the recording every detail of the painstaking work of removing and preserving all the almost 5,400 individual objects that filled the tomb. You see here a photograph of the treasury entrance from 1926, guarded by a statue of the god Anubis atop a portable shrine. The glass plate negatives of the more than 1,400 8x10 black and white images by Harry Burton are part of the archives of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. On the right is a statuette cast in solid gold from the 9th century BCE. It is an extremely rare example of a statuary made of precious materials that, according to ancient descriptions, filled the sanctuaries of ancient Egyptian temples. It represents the creator god Amun, who was arguably the most important god in the Egyptian pantheon. It was purchased by Lord Carnarvon in Cairo in 1917 and acquired by the Met from Almina, Countess of Carnarvon, in 1926. On April 28, 1967, United States President Lyndon B. Johnson awarded an ancient Egyptian temple built in the 1st century BCE, a gift from Egypt to the United States in 1964 to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Today, the structure known as the Temple of Dendur is one of the iconic and most beloved works of art at the Met. The gift highlighted Egypt's appreciation for the United States of America's support of the campaign to salvage Nubian monuments. Since it belonged to the time of the reign of the Roman Emperor Augustus and was dedicated by him, it could also be considered an important work of ancient Roman art and is an example where the emperor adhered to native Egyptian architectural and religious traditions. This expressed his commitment to honor the local cults and help confirm his legitimacy as ruler of the region. The Greek and Roman department is currently collaborating with our colleagues in the Department of Ancient Near Eastern Art on a major capital project for a new wing of the museum devoted to the arts of Cyprus and ancient West Asia. You see a visualization here by Nada, led by the architect Nader Tirani, of the introductory gallery, which is scheduled to open in the fall of 2026. The plan, which you see here, allows for a completely new presentation of these 2 major areas of the museum's antiquities collections, which will be brought into much closer dialogue with one another. It adds features such as a ramp that will make the galleries more accessible for all visitors. I would like to show you now a few more visualizations that will give you a sense of this major new wing, which is located above the Greek galleries on the 2nd floor, just off the museum's Great Hall. Of particular importance is the Assyrian Sculpture Court, which you see here. The Assyrian Sculpture Court displays sculptures from the Assyrian capital city of Nimrud in a space designed to evoke their original palace setting. The room is not a full reconstruction. Many aspects of the palace's original appearance remain unknown, and the sculptures themselves come originally from multiple rooms, although together they are representative of the way in which many rooms in the palace were decorated. The polychromy of the sculptures will be a new feature of the installation. The Met's collection of ancient Cypriot art is the finest outside of Cyprus. It was formed by Luigi Palma di Cesnola, who assembled the collection from private excavations on the island in the 1860s and early 1870s. It is the first archaeological collection to come into the museum, and Cesnola became the Met's first director, serving for 25 years. The display begins here with the presentation of Cyprus as the island of copper, with a significant representation of early Cypriot copper and bronze objects. Of special note is the copper ingot shown in the detail at left, which dates to the late Bronze Age and weighs some 70 pounds, representing the production of copper on the island on a massive scale already in this early period. Visitors will also be able to enter into the Cypriot galleries from the south, a visualization of which you see here. The limestone statue of Aphrodite from Golgoi greets you from this direction, where you enter into the Hellenistic and Roman gallery. According to myth, Aphrodite was born of the sea foam and first came ashore on the beach at Paphos in the southwestern part of the island. This gallery looks at the theme of the female goddess throughout time. It will also feature important loans from the Department of Antiquities in Cyprus, examples of which you see at left, that enable us to represent the earliest periods of human occupation on the island, which are otherwise not represented in the Cesnola collection. The Met's Greek and Roman collection, which consists of more than 30,000 objects, is the most comprehensive in all North America and one of the finest of its kind. Unlike in the Egyptian department, nearly all the pieces were acquired on the art market and lack their original archaeological provenance. The entire collection was reinstalled between 1996 and 2007 in 26 galleries, of which you see two of the most prominent here. One of the most delightful aspects of the Met's Greek and Roman galleries is the use of natural light and how it changes during the day and at different times of year. On the right, you see the Roman court in the early evening when the whole space takes on this remarkable bluish hue. Although rich in many areas, the Met collection has almost no antiquities from Sardinia, except this pair of gold earrings acquired on the art market in 1895, which is said to come from the site of Tharos, a view of which you see at right, and about which you've heard a little bit earlier today. We were thrilled to be able to display for 6 months in 2023 the Sardinian giant known as Manitou. You see the statue as it looked at the entrance to the Greek and Roman galleries, where it greeted hundreds of thousands of visitors. Although Sardinia is the second largest island in the Mediterranean Sea, its rich cultural heritage is relatively unknown to many people. Since we do not have any Nuragic artworks from Sardinia in our collection, it was especially gratifying to be able to represent this important Mediterranean culture through this major loan, even for a short period. And I'm grateful to Anthony Muroni, president of Mont'e Prama's foundation, as well as the Autonomous Region of Sardinia and the Italian Ministry of Culture, and Barbara Faedda, executive director of the Italian Academy for Advanced Studies, who helped to make the loan of Manitou possible. Manitou was a powerful figure in the center of the Belfer court, surrounded by contemporary ancient art from the neighboring cultures of Greece, Sicily, and Italy. He stood mightily there, a veritable poem in limestone to a heroic age from the mythic past. At a nexus of cultures, much as Sardinia itself lies prominently near the center of the Mediterranean Sea. Manitou enchanted visitors as they entered the Greek and Roman galleries and brought much warranted attention to the astonishing archaeological discoveries at Mont'e Prama, about which we have heard tonight, and the ongoing scholarly research as well as the conservation and restoration of the remarkable finds there that is shedding new light on the early history of Sardinia. Indeed, the Sardinian press suggested that I personally had been bewitched by the Sardinian giants, as you see in this interview published in La Nuova in August of 2023. Maybe it is so. When Manitou arrived at the Met in his giant blue crate with its little window, and we opened it to make sure that he had arrived safely, and I came face to face with the belly of the giant, I felt more than a little like someone in a Grimm's fairy tale. Manitou's visit to the Met was an altogether magical experience. I want now to give you a sense of the many important loans throughout the Met's Greek and Roman galleries like Manitou that are part of ongoing international collaborations and which immeasurably enhance our display and enable us to present the art of the ancient Mediterranean world. A particularly important international collaboration between the Met and the Republic of Italy stems from the repatriation in 2006 of the Euphroneus crater, which you see here. The Greek vase was famously acquired by the Met in 1971 for $1 million from the now disgraced antiquities dealer Robert Hecht. It turned out that the provenance provided for the vase by the dealer was false, and in fact the vase had been looted from a tomb at Cerveteri in Etruria not long before Hecht sold it to the Metropolitan Museum. The collaborative agreement established in 2006 involved a transfer of title and return of several ancient works of art, including the Euphroneus crater, in exchange for long-term loans to the Metropolitan Museum of comparably great works of art from the Republic of Italy. The Euphroneus crater remained on loan to the Met until 2008, after which important vases were lent, each for 4 years from different Italian museums. We are now hosting our 8th vase, which was installed in December 23 from the Ferrara Archaeological Museum, the Volue crater you see here. It was excavated at Spina in the first quarter of the 20th century and is particularly interesting for its iconography, which features a scene of 2 seated deities approached by worshippers in an ecstatic Dionysian dance. The crater is considered as a special Etruscan commission to an excellent attic workshop, the one of the painter Polygnotus. Its unique scene would have been specifically designed for an Etruscan client at Spina and his role in a local cult of the infernal Dionysus. This ongoing collaboration with Italy has fostered strong connections between the Met and numerous Italian museums, enabling the Met to present major works not otherwise represented and bring a large international audience to these important Italian collections. In the fall of 2019, we began talks about a possible new exchange of loans with the Salinas Archaeological Museum in Palermo, which led to a new collaborative agreement in 2022 with the Republic of Italy's Sicilian region that provides long-term loans of ancient masterpieces to the Met and the exchange of 3-year loans between the Met and the Salinas Museum. The Met now has on display a selection of important objects from the Antonio Salinas Museum that will be on view through the end of this year. The arrangement highlights the significance of Sicily's ancient cultural heritage and enhances the Metropolitan Museum of Art's presentation of major Greek regions during the Archaic period. You see the display here, which is featured on the east side of the Belfort Court. All the works come from the early excavations at Salinas and call attention to this important site that has been excavated since 2006 by New York University Institute of Fine Arts in collaboration with the Sicilian region. I am honored to have helped bring about for the first time a 50-year partnership between the Met and the Ministry of Culture of the Hellenic Republic around the Leonard N. Stern collection of Cycladic art. The historic agreement reached in 2022 and ratified by Greek Parliament is an innovative new approach to the repatriation of cultural patrimony that has already yielded significant results and creates a framework for international collaboration that will raise awareness about early Cycladic culture and support new research through ongoing programming, exhibitions, and publications. Displayed at the entrance to the Greek galleries at the Met, where Manitou was displayed, is the monumental Cycladic statue you see here from the Stern collection. It rightfully and spectacularly places Cycladic art at the very beginning of the presentation of large-scale representation of the human form in Greek art at the Met. The Leonard N. Stern collection significantly enhances the Met's ability to represent Cycladic art within the context of its encyclopedic collections. Comprising 161 works of Cycladic art, the Stern collection includes all the main types of figures from the early Cycladic II period, and part of the power of this collection and its display at the Met is the ability to see so many Cycladic sculptures presented together where the subtle variations between these handmade works becomes evident. A generous endowment from Leonard Stern also allows us to bring scholars from Greece to study Cycladic art at the Met, and Yorgos Gavalas, seen at the left, who is an archaeologist working in the Ministry of Culture of the Hellenic Republic in the Ephoria of the Cyclades, was our first resident for Cycladic art earlier this year. It has been a privilege to work with Yorgos on the Stern collection. Leonard Stern also endowed a study room, which you see at right, within our Onassis Library for Greek and Roman art, and an archivist position, which together with the Pat Getz Gentle Photographic Archive of Cycladic art, enables us to make the Met into a center for the study of Cycladic art that will bring scholars and initiate programs such as symposia, workshops, and lectures about early Cycladic art and culture. The most recent event to arise from this international collaboration was a Cultural Heritage Now panel discussion held at the Met last month entitled The Cyclades at the Met, which featured remarks from our director and from the Minister of Culture of the Hellenic Republic, Lina Mendoni, as well as 5 other participants in discussion about aspects of the collaboration and its benefits. It is in the context of all these international collaborations between the Met and other institutions and countries that I want now to present the first goal of the Met's MOU with the Mont'e Prama Foundation, which is to include a significant selection of artworks from Sardinia in our forthcoming major loan exhibition entitled Across Wine Dark Seas, Art and Identity Beyond Ancient Greece. The exhibition seeks to explore the extraordinary skill and creativity of Greek artists during the 8th to early 5th centuries BCE, a time of dynamic cultural interchange when the Greeks left their homeland for far-flung places across the Mediterranean Sea and beyond. Scheduled to open at the Met on December 14th, 2026, the exhibition will run to April 11, 2027, and will present a panorama of exceptional works of art produced in response to the remarkably diverse cultures they encountered, which ultimately reshaped the nature of Greek identity. A red figure hydria of Apollo on a winged tripod, a masterpiece of the Berlin painter, introduces the exhibition. The oracle of Apollo at Delphi was consulted before all major undertakings, including the founding of colonies. Another important vase, which you see at left, also from the Vatican Museum's collection, illustrates the hero Heracles crossing the sea in the cauldron of the sun god Helios. Heracles traveled throughout the ancient world, and his adventures in Greek myth are a kind of leitmotif throughout the exhibition. The exhibition is organized geographically and follows the travels of the Greeks as they encounter the Persians, Lydians, and Phrygians in the Near East, Egyptians and Nubians in Africa, Etruscans and other indigenous peoples in Italy, Iberians and Celts in Spain and France, and the Thracians and Scythians to the north. Our show draws strongly on the Metropolitan Museum's own collection, which will make up about 1/3 of the objects and bring together works in various media to explore changes and innovations in artistic styles, techniques, and traditions within the larger contexts of seafaring, trade, colonization, and migration. Some 200 works from all around the ancient Mediterranean Sea and north to the Black Sea region will be represented, from Greek city-states, trading outposts, and foreign settlements where Greeks traveled, and even further afield where Greek goods circulated, such as the impressive Greek bronze vessels found in Celtic and Thracian tombs. We are particularly thrilled to be able to show the archaic Greek bronze crater from Vix, which you see at upper left, which is a national treasure of France and has not left the country since it was brought there in the 6th century BCE. As part of the exhibition, we aim to represent the art of local cultures with whom the Greeks were in contact. Sardinia was an important locus for intercultural and economic exchanges during the Bronze Age and Iron Age, especially thanks to the island's mineral resources and central location, allowing for control of trade routes. We are currently in dialogue with the colleagues at the Cagliari Museum and the Mont'e Prama Foundation about borrowing the limestone statue of the warrior known as Geri from Mont'e Prama to illustrate monumental sculpture from the Nuragic civilization. It would be the largest work of sculpture in the exhibition. The giants from Mont'e Prama, dated between the 10th and 8th centuries BCE, offer an exceptionally early Mediterranean example of monumental stone sculpture long before the Greek koroi. Sardinia's ancient material culture provides an opportunity to present the local Nuragic culture and its interactions with Phoenicians and Greeks who also settled there. In mythology, the Libyan hero Sardos, believed to be a son of Heracles, gave his name to the island when he settled there with a large group of men. A small selection of works which you see here would enable us to tell this story. The bronze statuette of a warrior known as Miles Cornutus is a good model for reconstructing the monumental limestone statue known as Geri. This warrior imagery, which predominates Nuragic sculptures, alludes to heroic virtues such as skill in battle and athletic competition, and reflects the values of power and social status that are found in many cultures throughout the Mediterranean world in the Iron Age and Archaic period. The other two items come from Tharos, which was a major Punic settlement in the 6th century BCE at the crossroads of trade routes to Iberia and Carthage. The black figure amphora is an import from Attica in mainland Greece, and the gold bracelet is a Phoenician manufacture and probably made locally. They represent the great cultural diversity of the time. In summary, I have tried tonight to give you a sense of how we are representing the ancient Mediterranean world at the Met, and some of the ways we have been able to leverage international collaborations successfully. We stand at the threshold of a new era of collaboration between the Met and Sardinia, and although we have not yet defined all the initiatives we will undertake together, already we have begun successfully on this path, and having seen for myself the outstanding capabilities of our Sardinian colleagues, well displayed this evening by the amazing talks, and the incredible cultural heritage that they care for, I know that we can achieve great things together. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank Seán for that final and fantastic presentation that we've just all experienced and witnessed. What we now have the opportunity to do is to, again, thank all four of our presentations. I want to thank them at once for not just presenting such amazing sites and amazing structures, but also the materials that come from that. But especially, I think, the ideas, the interpretations, the readings that come from all this material, at once prompted by Mont'e Prama, but also I think we can see just the extent to which it is connected to this bigger, broader Mediterranean world. So to that end, I think we have an opportunity now to open the room to questions for our four speakers. I'll try to moderate that from here. I'll try to find hands moving up. And I think we have microphones too that can be passed out around to people as well. So questions?
Are we on? Yes, excellent. Coming your way. I'm not sure exactly who to direct this question to, so perhaps someone can pick it up. I'm curious about, I don't know a whole lot about these giant, the Gigandanti. This gesture, I guess, is the boxer. Is this what we're calling the boxer? This is such an interesting gesture to me because it looks both offensive and defensive as a gesture. In other words, it looks both protective and also something that could be aggressive. And I'm just wondering, I've just never seen anything like it, and I'm wondering if anyone would like to address that. How much do we know about the meaning of that gesture?
Question.
I don't know, because this jest is only in this kind of representation, only in statues, and only 3 others bronzetti, little figurines. So yes, is this that you said? Is a defense, a defensive jest? Also, we know that the boxer are used to combat. No, I shown the figure where the statues in the later bronze we don't have this, have the mark, and it's not sure, but maybe they painted also in red this kind of marks. So it's very impressive that the combat is very well expressed in these statues. So yes, we think this is really a defense, but also show attack. Yes.
Thank you.
Similar to that, the overhead shield on the big stone sculptures, there's so much empty space between the head and the shield. It looks very difficult to carve. Is it is it 2 pieces, separate pieces?
One. It's only a block they sculpted a block of stone.
That's
There are
amazing.
not pieces joined. No, it's only one block.
Thank you, that's very
Carved.
amazing.
It's very difficult to do this.
This is just ignorance, but what do we know about the warrior culture? I'm wondering why so many, the sculptures are all warriors.
Yeah. We don't have archaeological evidences of war. No. No in the villages, no in Nuragic, no in other kind of settlements. So we don't know if it's only representative idea of war and the power. These figures are powerful, and so maybe it's only ideological, but we are not sure because we need more archaeological evidences or proof. But in the Sardinia, we don't have evidence of battle or war, or also traces of burial. No, we don't have. Sì, certo.
I will just add a fact, because I sort of realize, I think none of us really emphasized, although you just said that these burials that we see here for the Iron Age are about the only ones that we know for this period from Sardinia, and so that severely limits the sort of the evidence we have otherwise. And then the other point is about, you rightly, well, so the term warrior culture has been used. That doesn't mean that these people who were buried there, who are one of the few who actually give us evidence, that they were the ones going into war. In fact, while Anna emphasized that they were well-fed, muscular, they also, the osteological evidence does not show any wounds. So it could well be that these were the guys who were sending other people into battle, but we're making la bella figura with these things. So it is very complex, and we only see a tiny glimpse of what's going on because there's limited evidence.
More questions? One across the back.
Do you mind passing this down?
Hello, this one's specifically for Professor von Dommelen. I appreciate your sort of greater contextualization of Sardinian culture within the Mediterranean, and moving away from ideas of any sort of, sort of Phoenician monoculture or homogeneity. I'm wondering if you've identified many points of origin for contact from throughout the Mediterranean, between sort of quote-unquote Phoenician cultures and also Sardinian cultures.
Do you mean in terms of imports and those sort of? Well, I think, yeah, there are, it's pretty clear that Phoenician materials, or whether imported or manufacturing techniques for pottery in particular, which is the main sort, but also architectural, and so the reference is really sort of central Mediterranean. So it's Sicily, North Africa, that are the sort of the main reference. There's limited material, very limited material from the Near East itself. And there's not a lot from Iberia. It's in those earlier periods there's more Sardinian material that we find in Iberia than the other way around, which may be an artifact of excavations and those sort of things. But it is especially the central Mediterranean, including Carthage, is a sort of an important sort of area of interactions. And that is one of the significant points, are actually the so-called tofets, those sort of ritual spaces that are found only in the central Mediterranean, including Sardinia.
Thank you. One down here.
Thank you very much. Could you go back to the image you had previously that showed the bronze statue on the upper left? Yes. So this sculpture doesn't operate in a vacuum. And so I'm just curious if you could trace for us the aesthetic and formal influences that go into, say, the making of this statue. The headdress is extraordinary, and this shield is also evokes images from other cultures, and I wonder if you can trace these influences.
Yes, there are, it's sure there are influences for maybe Oriental art. Liliu said, but it's a very long time, that he said that was influences from Syria and Near East. We don't detect a specific area. So some part of this, the clothing, are very close to image from Near East, and but other it's possible are local elaboration of something that they know, that they saw. So, but it's very difficult to find the specific area of influence. And also the shields, the different part of the armor is of different type. It's not only one cloth. One is very. It's various. The kind of clothing is very different. You can. Yes.
I think it's. The local, local provenance is really, I think, the main thing that comes out. It's not made in a vacuum. It doesn't come out of a vacuum. So it's not been produced or sort of come out of a tradition that sort of operates in total isolation. So there are sort of connections, but a lot of it's really the whole and the major thing is really local. One of the things that you don't see in this one, but that Anna demonstrated and pointed out in her talk, are these daggers that are very prominently displayed on quite a few. They have a very special sort of shape of the hilt. That is a very local thing without a doubt. And so there's more, the shape of those horned helmets. Horned helmets occur a lot. That's sort of in many cultures around the world, in many different places. And so the idea of, horns on a helmet, it's sort of, you get these things in the Neolithic in various parts of the old world, going back to even Paleolithic, perhaps ideas of skulls with remains of antlers or so that in shamanic sort of things people put on their heads. So it's a very general idea, and I think there's not much point to try and trace these specific shapes to specific areas. What you can see, as you were emphasizing, you cannot imagine anyone going into battle being energetic, going around with this big thing wobbling on their head. So, the same, the elaborate shield. So there's these things as well. These are special occasion items, presumably, as far as we know, because we haven't found anything in real life of that.
Yeah. And also this kind of sword is typical of Sardinian production. It's a votive sword, so is not able to do a battle. It's very in this kind of sword has a very low quantity of tin, so it's not a good bronze. It's only for parade, for representation, the idea of swords.
I might actually get a question in myself, if I might take advantage of being the moderator here. So what I'm seeing here is this Mont'e Prama site. It's an outsized site, right? It's a massive burial settlement. It's got massive statues. We're talking whether we go from the 10th down to the 8th, whether we take the world down to this Phoenician gold bracelets. We've got these Attic black figured amphorae. So we've got this enormous burial landscape. But we don't find, where's the settlement for this that's equally outsized for that? We don't see it underneath Tharos. We don't get that kind of settlement for Tharos. Are we just not looking in the right place? Have we not looked in the right place? Am I asking the wrong question? What are we missing here between outscaled burial settlements and a lack of living settlement?
No, I wouldn't say that there are no there is not one single settlement, but the whole Sinis and that area is one of the areas that's richest in Nuragic. So the whole area is chock-a-block with settlements, and so I think you should see it in that light.
As multiple sites contributing to this one Mont'e Prama.
And if you want to look to some sort of parallel, it would be the existence of these regional sanctuaries that exist in various parts of Sardinia, and that there's nothing else in the lowlands of the sort of northern Campidano Sinis, but you have two smaller ones on the hills going up Santa Cristina and Sumonti, sort of that are just sort of on the hills that look down into the plain. But in this part of Sardinia, there's nothing else. And so I think you need to see, it's because it's a burial site, but it's also a site of, the display of the statues. You only display such statues if there's people coming to see them. So that implies that it was a place that was frequented by people. Yeah. Possibly because, there's no other way. If you want to go to Taros in that direction, you have to go there. But perhaps also it was you can think of it in some sort of pilgrimage terms of celebrating ancestors, and, we can make up a lot of ideas, but I think some of those are not necessarily behind. But as it is, we don't have any more consistent evidence, because there is this paved area probably where the statue stood, but the excavations have not yielded remains of, say, ritual activities in these areas, as you find in prehistoric monuments like the giant's tombs that have areas where you can see there's the remains of people were, throwing vases on the floor and doing other things. If they did that in front of the statues, then they nicely cleaned it up, and so we're not going to find them.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious of, I have one more question through here, right behind you.
So this was unknown before. There were these structures, but people just did not have any comprehension of what it meant till you started the excavations. Is that correct? 50 years ago, yeah.
Sorry, I don't quite understand.
Well, I don't there were these structures that were there, but that the civilization was almost unknown.
You mean the structures, the Nuragi, or?
Yeah,
these settlement towers. Well, because they stand up, or do you mean, sorry?
So 50 years ago, you discovered these monumental creatures. And before that, there were these structures, but there wasn't an understanding of this civilization from this period. Is that
No,
correct?
That's not quite correct. It is, so these Nuragi have, these are the large settlement towers, of which there are 8,000 in various states of, disrepair across the island. We've shown you only pictures of the ones that are most impressive and best thing. So quite a few are just a bunch of stones. But they're visible, and they're everywhere in the fields, and everybody knows them, has always known them. Many of them, they're referred to with, they have nicknames, sort of, so they're very much part of local life, and they're referred to sometimes the big red one, or simply the big one, and those sort of names. Those have always been known, and archaeologists have started studying those, 200 years ago. Historians, sort of first antiquarians and all that. This particular cemetery site, Mont'e Prama, is in itself a chance find. It was just a farmer plowing who came across the first remains, which then triggered, as it should, archaeological service coming up and checking up, and a collaboration between the service and the university. It's really sort of an exemplary way of how these sort of procedures should function. And that's, well, you've seen what has resulted there.
There are 12,000 of monuments of remains of Nuragic culture. Impressive. All the island is full of remains of structures. So it's a very big quantity of monuments. There are Nuragi tomb, so-called giant tombs, temple, circles, a lot, villages, huts, remains of huts, a lot of monuments. So the discovery is for the necropolis, because this kind of necropolis, we don't know how many are in the island, because only Mont'e Prama was discovered, but there are not signs at the exterior. So if the farmer didn't move the soil, was impossible to find something. So because for this kind of necropolis, there are not signs at the exterior. There are stelae or other things. So we hope to discover other Mont'e Prama, but no, we are only Mont'e Prama now, not the other.
And you should also take into account that the island of Sardinia is a very large island. It's sort of almost it's often called a sort of continental style island in the context of the Mediterranean. And to give you a sort of a US idea, it's 9 times the state of Rhode Island, more or less. So to give you.
Well, I'm conscious of time getting along. We have some final comments from Barbara Faedda. I want to take this as my final moment here to sign off, and I'd like to do that by thanking our 4 speakers one more time. Join me in thanking them. Thank you.
So we are going to close these celebrations with a toast downstairs, as we also officially open the photo exhibition about the giant statues. We are thankful to the Autonomous Region of Sardinia and to the Mont'e Prama Foundation for their generous support and fruitful collaboration. I'm deeply grateful to my colleagues and students here at the Italian Academy for their enthusiasm and energetic work. Finally, please join me in thanking our speakers and wonderful moderator for a very stimulating and fascinating afternoon. Thank you, grazie e buona serata a tutti. See you downstairs.